Welcome to the CARRseat. Today we are talking to Michael Power, Professor of Accounting, Fellow of British Academy, former Director of CARR as well. And we are talking particularly in the context of the publication of this new book, Riskwork, which Mike has edited and has just been published by Oxford University Press. Mike, why did you feel the urge to write this book?
Thanks, Martin. It wasn't quite an urge, it was an idea that had been unfolding for a number of years, and I think the basic premise was that I noticed that it's quite difficult to talk about risk management without the shadow of disasters and accidents hanging over the discussion. So many academic papers about risk and risk management usually start with some account of a disaster, and that provides the sort of basis for the discussion that follows. And indeed, quite a lot of analysis of risk management is retrospectively constructed from looking at disasters, seeing what went wrong. So my question was really, would it be possible to actually think about risk management as a routine practice away from this bias towards accidents, disasters? Obviously, risk management is there to somehow prevent bad things happening. But we don't really know enough about the routine mechanics, the routine processes, the everyday, literally the everyday life of risk management across a wide variety of fields. So that was the kind of basic idea. And I also noticed that in adjacent fields of organization studies and management studies, scholars were becoming very interested in organizational routines, and there was what has been called a kind of new interest, a new turn towards studying work processes. And somehow this strand of thinking had not really connected with risk management. So another ambition around this collection was really to provide some of those connecting points between risk management and mainstream management studies of organizational routines. So having thought about that for a few years, I thought, well, who's working in this kind of way? Who's thinking about these things in different areas? So I put together a workshop, more or less as an experiment, organized under the motif of Riskwork, the blended term, and just to see what would happen and what would come out of that.
You said it's a collection, so what kind of sectors have you included in this book?
Yes, well, actually quite a wide variety. So many of the chapters in the book cover sectors like aviation, chemicals regulation. We've got financial services has a strong but not exclusive representation, the railway industry, toy manufacturers, so quite a strong spectrum. Also, the sort of medical field, particularly psychiatry and psychiatric care, is represented. So a very, very broad spectrum of studies.
The title, as you said, the motif is the word risk work. Yeah. What kind of work is risk work?
Well, I kind of thought of the title before I really knew what the content was, and I must confess I was expecting to find the micromechanics of the Audit Society, which is one of my audit processes, was one of my kind of big interests. But in actual fact, the results and the contributions of many of the chapters were far richer than that and revealed a much more complicated picture of varieties of kinds of work. So, for example, risk work might encompass very technical things to do with risk measurement and calculations of probabilities and those kinds of mainstream type risk analyses. But equally, a lot of the work was political. So risk workers as such were engaged in quite political activity, enrolling people into their way of looking at things, engaging with other partners, building networks both within and across organizations. And this theme of being accountable and covering oneself for blame purposes was at best a part of, but not the whole story of risk work. So I think the thing that really sticks out is just the sheer variety of kinds of work.
And who are the risk workers in this book?
Well, that was also interesting because quite a big variety. In the sense the risk work is not just done by risk management specialists, and other people are drawn into it, engineers, doctors, and in the case of the psychiatric field, it was very clear that patients were also co-producers of risk work in the management of particular settings. So I think what was interesting is that you had a much more distributed sense of who was contributing to the management of risk in an organization, whereas with more standardized regulatory templates and ideas, we tend to focus on the risk management team or the board or very particular kinds of groups, safety engineers as such. But when one looks at work processes, then you have to look beyond these groups for all sorts of actors involved in making up the management of risk.
And I mean, you said already the idea is to draw on other currents in the literature and bring it into the literature of risk management. I mean, why would you say, thinking about risk work and the kind of risk workers in this volume, what makes it particularly important for now?
Well, in terms of both the academic literature and also the sort of regulatory policy, I think there's very, very little understanding of the underlying organizational processes of the normal functioning of organizations, not when things are going wrong and things are pathological. So we are interfering with and prescribing changes in organizations without a kind of clear understanding of the kind of organizational dynamics. So I think one of the things that makes the book and the collection important, both academically and from a policy point of view now, is, I guess, to kind of provide an antidote to the sort of feeling that if you draw up a framework or a prescriptive framework for risk management, that is how it's actually going to operate in any organization. And I think the book gets below that to look at some of the more interesting features of risk work.
Mike, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.